Update on what's happening with the Marsden Point oil refinery. It's New Zealand's only oil refinery based just south of Whangarei, and it's been in operation since the mid-1960s. So if you're not up with the play, the shareholders, dominated by the three oil companies operating in New Zealand, have decided to close the refinery down. That'll happen by the middle of next year, and then we'll be reliant totally on imported refined products coming from refineries up in Asia. The refinery shareholders have made a commercial decision. They think they can make more profit by importing refined fuel, although the refinery is operating quite profitably as it is right now. So what will the situation be by the middle of next year? Well, we'll be totally reliant on refined fuels coming in from overseas. But what if there's a supply chain issue? We've got those at the moment. As you'll notice, there are a lot of shop shelves that are not full. The price of products has gone up because of the supply chain not being able to deliver. So what happens if there's an increase in the international tensions between the USA and China? You'll be aware, I'm sure, that those have increased in recent months with the signing of a treaty or an agreement between the US and the UK and Australia to build and deploy nuclear submarines in Australia. What happens to the supply chain issues if those tensions increase? You'll be aware too, I'm sure, that China have increased their demands for reunification with Taiwan. They want Taiwan back in as part of Chinese territory. And China have built a military base on some very low-lying islands in Filipino territory in contravention of an international ruling. So if those tensions increased, what would happen to the security of our supply chain for refined fuel coming from Asian refineries? And how about if there were further terrorist attacks on oil supply facilities, such as what happened in 2019 when drone attacks took out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production? How secure would our fuel supplies be in that situation? Well, lots of people, both in New Zealand and overseas, think that we need to do something to ensure we would have fuel security for our essential services if those situations eventuated. Because after all, the refineries in Asia are not going to say, oh well look, we are short of oil, but we'll make sure that little old New Zealand, the furthest customer away and our smallest customer, is still going to get the fuel supplies that it needs. But we need fuel supplies to run our helicopter rescue services, to give the Navy and the Air Force disaster relief and search and rescue capability, to make sure that our inter-island ferries can run, and our transport fleets that deliver food into our supermarkets. And of course the producers of those foods, our farmers, need to be able to run their agricultural machinery. So if we can't get refined fuel to New Zealand, what happens to all of those things? Well, if the refinery was still in operation, of course we could refine our own oil. Yes, we get oil out of the ground in Taranaki, and while there wouldn't be enough to keep all our motor vehicles going, in a situation where there's a crisis, we certainly could refine that fuel and keep those essential services operating for a period of time. Can the Marsden Point refinery use that oil that comes from Taranaki? Well, it already does. It uses some of it. Most of it gets exported overseas, but the refinery has about 20% of its feedstock coming from that Taranaki supply source. And it could run on 100% Taranaki oil and keep those fuel supplies going in the meantime. So that's why I started up a petition a couple of months ago to try and put some pressure on the government to rethink its reliance on the oil company assurances that we're going to be okay in a supply crisis. That petition went to Parliament this week, and it's now gone to the Petitions Select Committee, and they're taking submissions on it up until the 25th of January. So if you, like me, share concerns about New Zealand's fuel security, then please put in a submission. You can find out more about that by sending me an email if you want to, and I'll keep you up to date, or by looking at our Facebook page or our website. So here are the addresses. Email leader@socialcredit.nz. It's LEADER @socialcredit.nz. Facebook is just socialcredit.nz, and our website, socialcredit.nz. And on the website you'll find out a lot more about the refinery, its background, and some information that'll be useful if you want to put a submission. So please do that. You've got until the 25th of January to get those submissions in, and the more submissions we have, the more pressure will go on the government to rethink. So what could it do? Well, it could do what Australia's done and tax fuel users by adding an extra cent onto the price of fuel. That will increase our costs, of course, but it would get us through. The other thing it could do is it could actually buy the refinery and take ownership of it again. After all, it was publicly owned when it was first built. And so how would it do that? Well, the shares in the refinery are currently worth about $260 to $300 million. That, you might say, it's a lot of money for taxpayers to front up with, but in actual fact the government wouldn't have to get any taxpayer money to buy those shares. It could use its own bank, the Reserve Bank, which is our central bank, and it could get the money from there. Because after all, and if you're not aware of this, the Reserve Bank have created $60 billion in the last 18 months. So in case you thought you heard that wrong, let me repeat it. $60 billion the Reserve Bank has created in the last 18 months. So where's that money gone? Well, it's gone mainly into the reserves of the commercial banks, and they've used that to underpin the money creation they've done to lend for speculation in the housing market, which is why our house prices have skyrocketed in that time. So the government could instead use that credit creation ability of the Reserve Bank and come up with the $300 million to buy the shares in the refinery and get it back into New Zealand ownership, and it could be run as a state-owned enterprise, a commercial entity, and produce the fuel that we need. And in a crisis, it would still be there when we need it to refine our Taranaki oil and keep our essential services going. So there we go. My call out to you today is please put in a submission, and if you find that you need some more information, please go to those sources, because there's plenty there. Thanks for listening.